This is Linux Inlaws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. Welcome to Linux Inlaws, Season 2, Episode 29. Martin, how is life treating you apart from the usual?
Well, very excited, actually.
You are excited?
I am.
Why? The tax collectors didn't show up on your doorstep for a change this morning?
No, that's not yet. The tax isn't due tax return isn't due until the end of January. But no, I'm excited about our guests, of course.
Oh yes, Martin, we do have guests, of course. Yes,
we do.
Let's keep the chit chat to a minimum.
Yes,
and roll on to our guests. So, without further ado, let me introduce our guests. Zoe, Greg, the floor is yours.
Hello. Yeah, so this is Zoe, Executive Director of the Free Software Foundation, and I brought with me Greg Farough, our Campaigns Manager.
Hey, how's it going?
Before we strip your history with regards to finer details, why don't you tell the two listeners in the audience who do not know who the FSF is, what the FSF actually is, the Free Software Foundation?
The Free Software Foundation is an organization in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States that has as its main mission to bring user freedom to all computer users. And we were established in 1985, and that was the pivotal moment that the organization started being the fiscal sponsor for something called the GNU project, which is a project that was designed or originated to be the free operating system that Richard Stallman believed had to be in place in order to prove that the world could live in a world of free software. I'm messing this up a little bit. Greg, do you want to take a moment to add to that?
To swoop in, yeah. Well, if you think about people who are passionate about free software and how they believe free software should be a thing, and then you take that belief and then you throw it as far as you can into like the maximum level of commitment to free software, of believing that everything should be free software, you will get an organization like the FSF. So like Zoe said, we are the fiscal sponsor of the GNU project. We also do a lot of other things. We're divided into teams that all have, different work, which we can go into in a little bit. But yeah, the way that I like to explain the Free Software Foundation is just it's our role to be the maximum of the free software movement that we can, basically, to show people that it's possible, and to show people that, we are really serious in our beliefs and how wide-reaching they are.
Yeah, so we're the organization that wrote the free software definition, and that is, of course, the definition that spells out that users should have the freedom to run a program as they wish and study it and modify it and then redistribute all those modifications again. And we advocate for free software and have done that since 1985. Spent those 40 years both running an organization fully on free software so that, we practice what we preach. And then we do licensing because besides the free software definition, we are also the copyright holders of the GNU General Public License, or which is what is known for a lot of people as the GPL, which is a strong copyleft license that is known by a lot of people as something that is the free software license. And we have a licensing team at the FSF as well that does compliance work and making sure that people know about the GPL, know how to use it, and they answer a lot of questions from people who are, for example, software developers or maintainers thinking about licensing their projects as GPL licensed projects. And we also make sure that people in general are aware of what the concept of free software is. And we do that mostly with our campaigns team, which Greg is a big part of. And we have a whole range of different campaigns that we run because the free software issue really touches on most parts of our digital lives.
Speaking of history, you already mentioned 1985, but of course the free software movement goes way back further than that. There was a certain character by the name of Richard M. Stallman who actually founded the FSF, if I'm not completely mistaken, but did a lot of contributions, or made rather a lot of contributions prior to founding the FSF. Maybe now it's the time to go into a little of into history of how Richard got to the idea of free software and what happened afterwards.
Yeah, sure. So back in the day when software wasn't actually something that was all around us, it happened to be so that Richard M. Stallman was working at MIT with a professor Sussman, who he later also founded the FSF with as one of the founding board members. So they were working on in a computer lab, and in that computer lab was a printer, and that printer had an issue that they wanted to fix. I believe it was, Rick, refresh my memory. It was something with the ink, right?
The paper.
Oh no, it kept jamming. That's it.
Paper jam, yeah.
Yeah, so the paper kept jamming, and Richard had the idea to write a little resolve for that, so just to fix the issue. And so he tried to get into the source code of the printer to just install that little patch of software so that that printer would I think, make a notification or something like that if the printer was jammed, so that not a bunch of people would be pressing print, but someone would go and resolve the issue first. And then he was blocked. He couldn't do that. So he couldn't actually fix the printer that was creating a bunch of issues for them at the computer lab. And so he went to, some manager in some office asking to get access to that source code of the printer to make that fix. And he was again told that this was proprietary software and that he was not allowed to do that. That simple issue made Richard pretty upset. And it also motivated him to announce something called the GNU project, which is something that I mentioned before. He decided to develop a fully free, as in freedom, operating system. And I think that started in the end somewhere in January 1984. It was accompanied by something called the GNU Manifesto, in which he laid out all the issues with proprietary software and why free software was honestly the only ethical and honest and responsible and free way forward for society. And that was a pretty big hit, that GNU project. A lot of volunteers all over the world actually jumped in to help. And they ended up developing something that was very close to an operating system. And then Linus Torvalds, which is, of course, a name that we all know as well, developed something called a kernel that was pretty much the finishing touch on that GNU operating system that then resulted in a GNU/Linux fully free operating system. that meant that the work also started increasing, and the level and scale in which they were thinking and working became such a big thing that they realized that they needed an organization to host the GNU project and any other projects that might follow, and also support other community projects and campaign. And that is why the Free Software Foundation is now the organization that it is.
Interesting perspective. It's probably fair to say that one of the biggest contributions of the FSF is actually called the GNU Public License and the GPL. Given the history surrounding the GPL, I won't go into the finer details because the links will be in the show notes, but the whole thing originated from a controversy around Richard M. Stallman having written parts of Emacs, which of course is an editor, and James Gosling, funny enough, the same guy who did much of the original contributions to a program language called Java, had a little bit of a run-in, let's put it this way. I care to share the details or even the technical specifics that led to something called the GPL?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% clear on every aspect of the history, but Emacs development, it was originally called, I don't know that we would formally call it a license, but it was originally released under what Richard called the Emacs commune. And there was this kerfluffle between rival Emacs versions. James Gosling, of course, wrote the first version of Emacs that included Lisp as its extension language, which is obviously, you know, if we think about GNU Emacs, which still persists today, its sort of main selling point, so to speak. I'm not confident in going over every aspect or like the specific order in which things played out. But basically, as far as I understand, you know, Richard's solution to this dispute that he had with Gosling was to solidify principles that, you know, already existed in the Emacs commune idea, but were not, you know, explicitly spelled out. And that became the first version of the GNU General Public License. So as far as I know, Emacs was the first program to be released under the GPL, and the first, if not the only program to be released under this sort of proto version of the GPL that Richard called the Emacs commune.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a history around this project, because what James Gosling actually did is he got a company in it called Unipress, and he contributed certain parts of Emacs, and then he sold his version of Emacs, also known as Gosling Emacs, to Unipress. Needless to say, Richard, so goes the law, wasn't really impressed by this, rewrote the part that James did, and put it under, as you rightly kind of identified, the precursor of something called the GNU Public License. Hence this whole notion of what you can and what you cannot do with free software. Funny enough, if memory serves correct, the GPL was also the first license that an organization called the OSI adopted as a blueprint for an open source license.
Yeah, I know. So I know the OSI based their guidelines in some part on the Debian free software guidelines, but obviously once they, you know, kind of became involved in the process of license approval and their own organizational identification of which licenses are free and which aren't, they would say which are open and which aren't. You know, obviously the GPL would have been number one or part of the very, very first batch that they recognized in that way.
Now, it's interesting, you just mentioned Linux as being the kernel. Some people, especially the distro maintainers, probably would call Linux a full-blown operating system. They may or may not have a point. But I can recall the GNU project doing or trying to make an attempt to write their own kernel got hurt. It's probably fair by now to call it stillborn, because I ran into, what's his name again? Thomas somebody in a conference in '93 in Albuquerque, New Mexico,
links will, of course, maybe in the show notes if I recall. But Thomas was tasked with developing the first version of Herd. Herd never saw the light of day with regards to production readiness. So that's probably the main reason why the GNU project adopted Linux as its kernel, and hence this notion of calling the whole OS not Linux, but rather GNU Linux.
Right. So the Herd, it's kind of an interesting case because the Herd, it was very ambitious in being a microkernel. We're going to have this fabulously designed kernel that the GNU operating system was going to use. And whether or not that was a good decision to, set something so ambitious as the kernel that GNU was going to use is up for debate. What ended up happening is, Linus wrote Linux, which sort of was good enough, essentially. It was deemed good enough by like the wider free software community. And then it was adopted as GNU's kernel. There was kind of the simultaneous thing going on where the developers of the kernel Linux, took the existing body of GNU software, and there was some collaboration there back and forth. On the matter of the Herd, so yes, the Herd is stillborn in some sense. It is still developed by hobbyists. Actually, I can give you guys the link to this later. Somebody was able to get GNU Geeks, which is normally a distribution of GNU Linux, running on bare metal with GNU Herd last week, I think. And I can give you the show notes, but yeah. So, I mean, obviously exponentially less, more development attention than Linux is getting right now, but it is still, I think an interesting technical project is the way Richard describes it, and fun for hobbyists to work on, because the microkernel idea, I mean, is still something that, it's worth looking into, if nothing else. It's kind of not how things played out in the grand scheme of things, but it's an interesting technical approach.
I thought that discussion was mute in terms of that battle was won, lost, whatever you want to call it. I mean, Windows NT is a microkernel. Linux is a hybrid. Mac OS, if we take a very close look, is actually a microkernel too. But there's not much happening in that space. So microkernel or not, I reckon the ordinary user using free software couldn't care less about the technology beneath it.
Right. Yeah. It's only a discussion that I think is happening between people who are very interested in kernel architecture at this point, in 2024.
Indeed. Now, full disclosure, we had the Free Software Foundation, as in Matthias and friends, on the show quite a few times previously. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the two organizations and how they interrelate and what the collaboration model is, because full disclosure again, Matthias, if you're listening, and I'm sure you are, thank you for introducing me to Zoe in the first place, all those years back ago in Nuremberg. But so I reckon, and Matthias Koschner, of course, being the president of the FSFE, attends LibreOffice, which is one of your main conferences, if I'm not completely regularly. So the interaction must be quite close, I take it.
I think you mean LibrePlanet. Yes, LibrePlanet is our conference. Yeah, LibreOffice is that free software program that we use to do our...
Slip of the tongue, yes.
Yeah.
LibrePlanet, of course.
General processing of anything that's written text. So yes, Matthias is the president of the FSFE, and the FSFE is, of course, the Free Software Foundation in Europe. We make sure that we share the same name, so we make sure that we know exactly what it is that we are campaigning about. We communicate often to share ideas and to come up with different plans of potentially the same issue of what we could be advocating for or what we could be working towards. What you do notice is that generally, I think in Europe, people process the idea of free software a little bit differently than they do in the US, in the sense that a lot of the corporations that we feel have major freedom issues are actually American corporations. And so in Europe, they're already, I think, a little bit more open to the idea that this could be a problem from a control perspective. And that means that the advocacy in Europe looks a little bit different. And I mean, we're talking about that issue, but also the fact that you're talking about multiple countries, that you're talking about multiple governments, that you're talking about technically a slightly different foundation structure. So the rules are a little bit different about what we can and cannot do, or what we should and should not focus on in different countries. But we try and align on our messaging as much as we possibly can, and support each other in our different continents.
Would you say that Europe is further ahead than the US in terms of open source adoption, or the let's say the whole movement? Countries like Germany spring to mind, Switzerland, where they recently signed.
Yeah.
Those kinds
Yeah.
Regulation.
The Swiss development, where they had this full regulation that any governmental software had to be free software. I mean, those are beautiful things, right? Those developments, they're exactly what we're trying to achieve with our work. If you are a government, it's important that your constituents know exactly the software that you are using, and that they can control or make sure that they are not controlled by outside corporations. And I think the FSFE is running a campaign called Public Money, Public Code, which loosely translates to it's money that is from the people. And so we should know and be aware of how it's being spent, but also what it's being spent on shouldn't be filling the pockets of corporations that are then trying to bring back that control in some other way. It should be transparent. It should be free as in freedom. It should be responsible. And what is a good benefit is that it's often also less expensive. So these are developments that I think that you see in Europe more often than you do in the US. Absolutely. I do think that in Europe, like I said, I think they're just more open to the idea. I think it translates better for some reason here in, I say here in Europe because I am actually now in Europe, but for some reason I think it a lot has to do with the fact that these corporations, a lot of these controlling corporations, these corporations like Google, like Facebook, like Microsoft, they're American. And so I think governments in Europe and people in Europe have I think they are more inclined to stand up for the fact that they just don't like all of these outside influences in their own systems. I mean, just as much as America is now controlling Chinese software very intensely, I think that same idea is what happens in these European countries. I do think that they're more ahead. I think Germany is one of the places where one of the first free software legal cases was actually fought out, if I'm not mistaken.
There's certainly at least one, if not more, court cases dragged in front of a German court by, I can't even remember the name, but it's a German Herbert Weiner or something like that, who runs a website called GPL Violations, which apparently is funded by the FSF to some extent, that is in the business or mandates, let's put it this way, companies who are actually in violation of the GPL to be dragged. No, I wouldn't say dragged in front of course, because that's way too negative, but kind of rather resorting to sort out these GPL violations. And VMware, I think there's a case, there used to be a case a couple of years back in a German court, I think it was even in Hamburg, details remember the show notes, where actually he basically funded the court case that actually was instituted by the developer himself, if I'm not completely mistaken. Again, details may or may not be in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm also not not completely on top of it right now, so it's probably worth indeed putting it in the show notes later. But I think that's just to prove indeed that there is so much happening in Europe that you can point to that are developments that are really good for the proliferation of free software.
So, Donald Trump, if you're listening, and I'm sure you are, okay, going back to much more serious issues. You just mentioned public money, public code, which is, of course, one of the primary campaigns of the FSFE. Yeah. And for the people who missed out on the last couple of shows, basically, where we discussed this to some extent, it's about the idea that any piece of software funded by the taxpayer belongs in the public domain, never mind the realm of free and open source software in its original sense, as at least covered by an OSI compliant license. I'm just wondering if there are similar initiatives, given the, I wouldn't say predominance, but rather the visibility of the FSF, in collaboration with organizations such as the ACLU, such as the EFF, and all the rest of them, on a federal level in the US, because, if I'm not completely mistaken, actually, it's still the biggest economy on the planet, closely followed by the European Union, if I might add.
I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, we have, our regular contact with EFF organizations like that as well, to discuss if or what they are up to and whether or not it's something that we can jump onto. I think in Europe, people are more involved in and more connected to the governments as charities and foundations. As the FSFE being a 501c3, we are limited in the amount of lobbying that we can do. We can do education. And so a lot of our campaigns are focused on educating people about what they should demand from the government instead of actually working with governments themselves to implement it. So I think that is a bit of a difference between the FSFE and the FSF in how we approach the issue. And that's, I think, why our campaigns team is focused a little bit stronger on things like education, but also pushing very specific issues forward, like JavaScript issues or something that we recently launched called the Freedom Ladder, or which tries to explain to people that full software freedom isn't something that comes from night to day. It's something that you have to develop over years. It's an understanding that once you start, we hope that you keep developing further towards full software freedom, that you don't have to be exactly like the FSF is or preaches to be, or we push our mission forward saying that everything has to be full software freedom. But we also fully and completely understand that if you are just now learning about this, then starting with a free software program is a huge step forward. And we hope that from there you keep developing. And so we try to give people tools to go through those steps and learn more and more in the process, both from a technical perspective as well as from an ideological perspective on like what the concept of free software really is and how deeply ingrained in society the issues are that we are advocating against.
You're corporate as a 501c3, right?
Yes.
Full disclosure, people, there is actually an episode on 501s for the people who cannot get to sleep. That's the episode you want to listen to. Check out the back catalog in case you're wondering what that episode really is. But of course, a 501c3, and I'm quoting now the RIS tax code, gives you the liberty of focusing on religious, charitable, scientific, literary, and educational purposes, meaning you are one step away from world domination with that 501c3. So go for it.
I mean, yeah, we definitely try for world domination. No, I'm kidding. So in practice, what our status looks like, or what our government influence will look like is we're often boosting the efforts of others since we can't lobby so much directly. One thing that comes to mind is there was some effort in New Hampshire, the U.S. state of New Hampshire, a few years ago to basically do like a very, very miniature version of what's going on in Europe, to say like New Hampshire public websites should use free JavaScript, New Hampshire government offices should use free software. There were some bills introduced to that effect. And, since we can't go around introducing those bills ourselves, we try to got that message out as far as we could. We got people into the hearing room when it was being read to voice support for it, because even though, New Hampshire is a comparatively small state, I think there were 2 Microsoft reps that showed up to say what a horrible idea this would be. And we had 4 from what I remember. So that was nice. But yeah, even though we can't take a very direct involvement in, influencing government policies and things like that, we can echo the efforts of others. We can still draft legislation, provided somebody else kind of takes it from there. But yeah, like Zoe mentioned, we tend to focus more on the ideological side and the issues side because that's what we've always been known for, and that's what people expect from us. We kind of have always been in this position of being the sort of a word that we tend to use a lot is lighthouse, right? Of pointing out the moral issues, of showing how X issue ties into free software. So that's a role that we're very comfortable in, and more of our main focus as compared to a group like FSFE.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Greg is saying, that on top of the campaigns that we're doing, of course, we also spend quite a bit of time on the licensing issues as the copyright holder of the GPL and the copyright holder of many of the GNU packages. We do tend to spend a lot of time in the deeper legal and licensing parts of the free software application, basically.
Going back to that meeting that you just mentioned, Greg, where only 2 Microsoft reps were present, that must have been some time ago, because how can I put this? The attitude of a company called Microsoft has changed significantly under the stewardship of a guy called Satya Nadella, who's current CEO of Microsoft. These days, after Halloween papers and all the rest of them, are pretty much gone. What's your take on the recent conversion of companies like Microsoft towards a much more approaching attitude towards open source? And NVIDIA and all the rest of them actually do follow suit if you take the recent developments into account.
First off, the issue that I mentioned, I think it was only 2 years ago. Satya was still the CEO at that time, I think.
Maybe they didn't get email.
Yeah, maybe not. The thing about large corporations like Microsoft is, they can and often do entertain 2 ideas at once, or they will say one thing but do another. We see this a lot in proprietary software development and then in huge corporations generally. I mean, the tagline that was going around a couple of years ago on T-shirts and things like that was, Microsoft loves Linux. There was this whole ad campaign, and maybe, but just because you love a program does not mean that you're committed to user freedom. So if they really are invested in this, they can take concrete steps to do that, right? So yes, one popular thing that people will go to now is, well, Microsoft owns GitHub, isn't that promoting free software? I mean, in a sense, it's providing a hosting service of free software, but GitHub itself is non-free software. GitHub has essentially captured the entire, for all intents and purposes, free software development ecosystem into itself. So, I mean, even though Microsoft will say these things, I think we should look at them very skeptically, because until they show a definite commitment towards user freedom, which for them would look something like freeing programs, freeing GitHub source code, if nothing else, the non-free JavaScript behind GitHub, then I don't take the statements that they make very seriously, honestly.
Interesting that you say that, because they happen to employ two main contributors to open source software, a guy called Leonard Petring, and of course Guido van Rossum, who came up with this whole Python nonsense about 30 years ago. Given the fact that, or given the impact of these two projects on the, and of course Leonard Petring being the inventor and still maintainer and contributor, or the main contributor to something called Systemd as an init system that has taken over the majority of Linux distributions out there, it's probably fair to say that Microsoft does have the attitude of giving back to the community on its list. The position.
I don't think I would disagree with that, actually. Because...
Martin, please disagree. Go ahead.
No, I mean, just to name one example, yes, they may employ some open source contributors, but I think Microsoft's attitude has always been
buy them.
If we can't build it, we're going to buy it and capture market share that way. So it's,
exactly.
Exactly
if we don't buy them, exactly.
So,
on a much more serious note, any comments, Zoe or Greg?
No, I think Martin hits the nail on the head there. Sure, there have been some contributions to, or what people call open source, but we advocate for something that is called free software, and we do that really purposely. We do it without any compromise. We don't do it to earn any money. We don't do it to, make our corporation bigger or organization bigger or, to please anyone. We do it because we genuinely believe that free software is actually the way that software should be built. People should know what's happening in their applications, in their programs, in their phones, in their computers, in their TVs, and these days in their refrigerators. They should be able to study it. It's your tool, your application. You should have the liberty, the freedom to do whatever it is that you want with that. And that's something that I think if you ask Microsoft the question if they support that, then they'll probably go back to their finance department and ask what it would cost.
Right. Yeah, and speaking of the... Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, completely agree with that, because it's... you mentioned open source and free, right? And there's still a lot of people that don't really see that difference. So that's presumably part of your education.
It's
all right.
Definitely. Yeah. That's something that we try and explain to people, that open source has a really nice listing of all the benefits that free software has. Yes, that is true. But open source was still a movement that was built out of the concept of free software to make the idea of free software more sellable. And even though it would be great if we could be more sellable, that is not our mission. It's not our goal. What we want is genuine, and we can't compromise to make that more sellable. And so we continue to bring that conversation back to what we believe people have the right to do with their programs, with their software, with their applications. And these days it's everywhere.
Just Natalia, if you're listening to something called Linux Inlaws, the email address is, or any member of the marketing department at Microsoft, the email address is feedback@linuxinlaws.eu. If you want to make a case on the show, please do get in touch. We're always looking for contributions, especially from the last conglomerates. No, I'm joking. Changing track just a little bit. Going back to a guy called Richard M. Stallman. Needless to say, he hasn't been without controversy over the last couple of years. Especially the ousting from the board comes to mind, never mind the reinstatement, for want of a better expression. Of course, links will be in the show notes, but maybe either Greg or Zoe, maybe you can share your personal opinion on what happened, and maybe if you can spill the beans, but you don't have to, needless to say, max yourself out. But I'm fully aware of the fact that this touches some very private parts of the FSF, so say what you can and will.
Sure. You're right. This is a bit of a sensitive topic for us. I mean, it's something that we've been dealing with for the last few years, and I think most people that are aware of what the Free Software Foundation is know this. Richard is indeed not a person that comes without controversy, unfortunately. In 2019, he actually resigned from the board of directors, and there are many people who are strong supporters of Richard Stallman, and there are many people that believe that Richard should not be in a leadership position in the FSF. Now, a lot of the really strong supporters of Richard gave the board the idea that if he was to be reinstated in the board of the FSF, then that would be a good thing. And so in 2021, Richard was voted back onto the board of the FSF, and the board, needless to say, underestimated what the community felt about this. And so that brought a lot of feeling and a lot of hurt and a lot of sense that the board didn't have a proper sense of what the community wanted and needed in and from the FSF. And that sparked a lot of issues that we're still working on. And it did one major thing, and that was make the board really reflect upon itself and whether or not they have enough connection with the full needs and feeling and also intentions, I think, of community members. And so that sort of sparked an entire process of them reflecting upon themselves, writing a whole new board governance process that actually we've been running in these past 2 years. And in June, that resulted in us accepting 3 new board members onto the board. That now makes the board a group of 8 people. And actually now we are currently, as we are recording this podcast, probably not as we're broadcasting it, but as we're recording this podcast, we are actually currently in the process of reviewing all the existing board members as well. And we do that now with a process where we ask the associate members to help research names and people and bring to light interesting issues or things that they feel the voting members should discuss. There were a couple other measurements that were taken. Like, for example, now there is a staff seat on the board that wasn't there before. Ian Kelly, who is one of our staff members, has taken up that position for a very long time now and is doing a really good job of bringing the sense that the staff has to the board members, all to sort of make the whole process more transparent, but which, really fits the FSF as an organization. I mean, that's what we want with our software. So that's also sort of where the board went, okay, we need to step up and do something about that. And Richard has been taking a very, his place and his responsibility in all of that process as well. So I don't know if there's much more to say than that.
No, we leave it at that. But I think Martin had a couple of questions himself before we wrap this up.
Yeah, but in reading up about the FSF a bit more, it's quite an interesting story that you as an organization run everything on open source software and build your own servers and all these kind of things. Is that something that you would recommend? Is that a big job? Do you have many people looking after this? That's really a testament to any organization out there to, just let's say, demonstrate how that can be done, right?
It's a major job, honestly. We have 2 tech team people, which is too few, honestly. And I think it's an angle of the work that we do that doesn't get as much attention because it's just structure. But we host all of our services ourselves. So, for example, we host our own phone system. We host our teleconferencing servers. We host literally everything that we do. And that it is hard. Like we always say to people, like, if you really want to have full control over anything, then host it yourself. But it's not, like, that's not something that as a general software user or consumer, I guess, you can just do. And so that does actually require a bit of extra technical skill. And our tech team is actually really talented, and they have skills that range from troubleshooting a customer retention database to indeed a phone server or a video conferencing server or something like that. So it takes a lot of effort to practice what you preach the way that we do, but we do it to indeed make sure that we don't start communicating about something that is actually quite difficult or challenging and pretend like it's not. Like, we know what we're talking about when we say that it's doable.
It's not just one piece of software, right? It's things like libraries and drivers, and there's so many dependencies these days.
It's everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes on and on. And honestly, like I say, we have 2 tech team members, but I'm not counting the immensely dedicated volunteers that we have, which is something that still amazes me and deserves a shout out. Like, we have volunteers that have been with us for years, and their skills and dedication are just exceptional to an organization like ours, and we really couldn't do it without them.
But for sure, on the subject of volunteers, is there anything that you want any more help with that you want to call out now?
Well, just because it kind of ties in very well, the sysadmins have recently, the tech team and sysadmins are an interchangeable term for us, have recently kind of started a group of volunteer system administration tasks, basically. So what that looks like is, Zoe could say the exact number of like virtual machines and services they are. I want to say like 36 or something. Do you know, Zoe?
And it's funny because I was going to say 63, but I might have.
So maybe
Can't we agree on 42?
Yeah, we'll go somewhere in the middle. No, I'm pretty sure it's more than 36 though.
It could be 63, but in any case, yeah. So they, a lot of them are lower priority than, say, keeping the FSF's phones online. So recently, some of that has been kind of given over to volunteers in some places. So if people want to do that, if GNU Linux system administration is something that they're interested in, that's one opportunity for sure, and we can provide the links to get involved with that. But in general, I mean, the best way to get involved with the FSF is just to promote free software, to educate yourselves on software freedom, talk to your friends about software freedom. I mean, our goal is not to promote the FSF so much as it is to just promote software freedom. So, in my mind, at least, volunteering from the FSF for the FSF is in some way indistinguishable from, filing bug reports, contributing code, and so on and so on. But with that being said, we do need your support to keep existing. We do, all of our stuff is free as in freedom, but we must pay for things with money as in beer, right? So any support that you can give us monetarily is also appreciated. But if speaking about the issues, learning about the issues is what you want to do, then do that. If it's the only thing that you can do that. That's the most important thing, getting software freedom out there as far as possible.
And with that, Martin, I think it's time for the POXs, as in the picks of the week. So, Zoe, what is your POX? Ladies first.
Yeah, so we were talking about this a little bit. Like I said earlier, I am in Europe right now, and in Amsterdam to be. Yeah, I'm actually in Amsterdam to be exact. And
Spreek je Duits?
What did you say? Sorry.
Spreek je Duits?
Spreek ik Duits?
I think Zoe is clearly Nederlands.
This is my name attempt Dutch,
yes.
exactly.
Very clearly Dutch I am, I think.
Yeah.
But that was funny though, Chris, what you did there, because you sounded German, but you said something Dutch.
Correct. Yes, I was. This is my very lame attempt. Full disclosure, Martin is Dutch, I'm not. I'm just trying every now and then, but I'm failing miserably. But so
I didn't know that, Martin, that you were Dutch. That's funny.
Yeah, that's a very close kept secret. No, I mean, Zoe, you're Dutch too, right?
Yes, I am.
Exactly. So
yeah, my accent is a lot more clear though than Martin's.
Yeah, that comes with training.
I've had a few.
We won't go into the details exactly. So Zoe, back to your POC. Sorry.
No. Yeah, we were talking. So we were walking down the street here in Amsterdam, and they have this thing on the market days that they have this street organs, the ones that do like the twist with like the pipe organs, and they do this. They have this little money shaking thing that goes on the tune, and it's the most annoying thing. Like I don't honestly know anyone that likes it, yeah. But my daughter does. So I have a young daughter, and she doesn't even speak yet, but she knows how to sign for more. And so every time we pass by one of these apparatuses, which are huge and always in the way as well and loud, she signs more. She loves it. So shout out to these people that no one likes, that my daughter adores.
Is that a Dutch thing, Martin? These three things?
It is, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I've never seen this
mainly
okay.
In the past, but I guess in Amsterdam it's a bit of a tourist attraction.
Yeah. Greg, so what's your POX?
Oh, wow. So this is about as FSF as you can get. But so there's this program called GNU EMMS, so the Emacs multimedia system. If you're the type of person who wants to control your stereo system from your text editor, it's a phenomenally useful program. It could use some more development attention. It's mostly one guy, Yoni Rapkin, who is a FSF volunteer on top of everything else. So shout out to the developers of GNU EMMS and Yoni and everyone behind it. I use it like all day long, every day. I think it's great.
And a very small correction, of course. Emacs is not an editor. Emacs is actually a full-blown operating system with a very comprehensive editor built in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I read something recently that described it as like an entire. There's always this question of like, how do you describe Emacs to somebody who's not an Emacs person? And someone who worked at the FSF for a long time said, imagine that you can do anything you want with a computer, but you require a PhD to be able to do it. But the way that I like to describe it, I think I saw something like this recently, is just if you can imagine anything textual on your computer kind of thrown into the same program, that would be GNU Emacs. So I live in it all day long. I send my email, like I said, control my stereo, blah, blah, blah. It's great.
Works anywhere, especially on fridges, TVs, and mobile phones.
Right, exactly.
That's it. Martin, over to you, sorry.
Yeah. I'm going to stick with the Dutch theme, actually, because growing up, I used to like Kooyman kaas, which recently I managed to get someone to bring me some over, which was very tasty. So
what is over?
Wow. Did you still like it?
I do still like it, yes. It's yeah.
I think from my reaction you can hear that I'm not the biggest fan.
Okay.
What is over for the uneducated among us?
Say again.
What is over?
Over.
Over. What is over? Yes.
Over is above or something like that. No?
Sorry, maybe I got this wrong, but what did you bring?
Kooyman-kaas.
Kooyman-kaas, yes.
What is Kooyman-kaas?
It's literally cheese with cumin in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you like cumin, you like cheese, you're in luck.
Human, as a H-U-M-A-N.
Cumin.
Cumin. Oh, sorry, the spice.
No, not
I thought you were going for cannibalism here. I see. Okay, links may have in the show notes. Okay, and with that I reckon it's almost time for my pox. Is actually a TV series, funny enough, called The Skeleton Crew. It started to air in December of 2024. It's of course parts of the Star Wars franchise, and it's about a group of little kids that get into a different environment, let's put it this way. They discover a starship on their home planet and then by accident activate this starship, and the series is about pretty much what happens afterwards. I won't give away too much, but if you are a Star Wars fan, you might not want to miss this. And with that, people, thank you very much for being here.
Yes.
And looking forward to having you on the show back again soon to give a status update.
Thanks for hosting us.
Anytime.
Thank you. Yep.
This is the Linux Inlaws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Salute Margaret, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.